Right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the May 6th Warehouse Working Group meeting. We're going to go ahead and give it another couple of seconds for people to join on. It's 3:01 right now, so we'll give everyone a chance to shift gears and come into this meeting, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a number of things to kind of talk through today, so thanks for joining. We'll go ahead and get started in just a second. Okay. I think the slowdown of participants is, well, the participants are starting to slow down here, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think we're going to need a lot of time to talk about the items we're going through today. So, welcome everyone. Again, this is the May meeting for the San Diego County APCD Warehouse Working Group, or the WWG as we're calling it. And we'll go to the next slide. So before we begin, we did have just a few meeting announcements as we normally do. Everyone except the presenter is muted unless called upon by the host. We ask that you save your questions and comments until the end of each section that we'll be presenting, and we'll note the opportunities where that occurs in a slide or two on the agenda. And then finally, we're going to be recording and posting the recording of today's meeting on the district's YouTube page. That's something we normally do with all the warehouse working group meetings. So we highly encourage everyone, if you'd like to catch up on what we've covered in previous meetings, to go ahead and do that. We also did just recently include summaries, one to 2 page high-level summaries of what we've covered at each warehouse working group session to date. Those have just gone up on the website about a week or two ago, so we highly encourage everybody to take a look at those as well. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of what we're going to be covering today in today's presentation. First, we're going to take attendance and some introductions of district staff and meeting participants. We'll then do a quick recap of the last WWG meeting held in March. April's meeting was canceled due to availability. And then we'll have Andrew Aguilar, who on behalf of the Industrial Environmental Association, or IEA, he'll be presenting an analysis on a warehouse study that they've conducted. Next, we'll discuss a truck trip rate analysis that is being conducted by district staff. We'll then discuss a working definition of a warehouse for the purposes of the warehouse working group discussions. And then finally, we'll provide a brief overview of comments staff received from the APCD Planning and Policy Committee when we briefed them on the WWG actions at their April 25th meeting. And then time permitting, we'll cover any non-agenda items that members or stakeholders may have. Next slide, please. So now we'd like to take a few minutes for APCD staff to introduce themselves once again. And then we'll go down the participant list as I see it here on Zoom. And if you haven't done so already, we like that if you could please put your name in the Zoom screen with your affiliation or who you represent, so we can track who's attending and who's here today. And so with that, I'll go ahead and start. My name again is Nick Cormier, San Diego County Air Pollution Control District. I'm the Rural Development Supervisor here in the county, and I will turn it over to Randy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Constellation, Associate Engineer in Rural Development. I'd like to turn it over now to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Kian. I'm the Chief of our Emission Reduction section here at the Air Pollution Control District. And I think we have Paula Forbes on the line with us today as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate that. And I am the Air Pollution Control Officer for San Diego County. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Good to see many of you again. And I will turn it back over to Janet on APCD staff.
Oops, I don't think you can see me. Hi all, Janet McHugh, Rural Development.
Great. Is that everybody from APCD?
Yes.
All
I
right.
would like to introduce our board member, Chair Jack Shu. I'll toss it over to him.
Hello, sorry that I'm muted, but Jack Shu, Chair of the APCD Board. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to be listening in and very excited about rule development for this warehouse indirect rule. So thank you all for participating, and hopefully I'll learn a lot by listening in.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Shu, for attending. All right, great. I will go ahead and now go down the line of who I see here on the screen, just in the order they're showing up on Zoom, in the interest of saving a little time on introductions. So I see Jack Munger here from IEA. I see Mazzy Hatch from MS Consulting. Alejandra Mir-Iteran from Otay Mesa Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, Andrew Aguilar is here from IEA. I see Angelica Carrasco from CARB. Claire Garcia. Claire, would you mind unmuting yourself or stating your affiliation for us, if you don't mind?
Hi, yes, Claire Garcia with ChargePoint.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I see Craig Benedetto. And Craig, you're representing NAOP, correct?
That's correct. Thanks, Nick.
Great, no problem. I see Dasni Ahangaba. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad, from Montrose Environmental, it looks like. Yep. I see Ian McMillan from South Coast Air Quality Management District. Carl Algener from Sierra Club. Lauren Cazares from San Diego Chamber of Commerce. Matt Trano from IDS Real Estate Group. Michelle Jerome from Port of San Diego. Nicholas Powell from Environmental Health Coalition. Regina Sue from Earth Justice. Rob Swanson from California Attorney General's Office. Rod Johnson. Rod, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself or stating your affiliation, if you wouldn't mind. No problem. We'll catch up with Rod in a couple of minutes here. Sam Peterson from UC San Diego. Cheryl Vaughn. Cheryl, would you mind stating your affiliation?
Hello, my name is Cheryl Vaughn and I'm with the Department of the Navy.
Great, thank you. Tim Garrett from Sandag. I see William White from the U.S. Consulate in Tijuana. Zach Friedlander from TRC Companies. Caitlin Arduino from Murphy Development Corp, it looks like, or company, sorry, one or the other. And is there anybody else that I missed? That's all I have, I think, on my screen. Okay, great. Well, hopefully I didn't butcher anybody's name too bad, but please correct me if it was just horrible. So thanks everyone. I think we'll go ahead now and get into our slides for today. So next slide. So as we normally do, the following is just a recap of the last meeting that we had for the warehouse working group in March. The discussion items included how to address one of the directives the district received from the governing board in our June 2023 board meeting, which was how the district may prioritize impacted communities in our ISR work. The results of how companies are complying with South Coast Air Quality Management District's Rule 2305 by looking at some data from the first year of implementation. And then finally, we discussed an introduction of a proposed incentive funding concept the district plans on moving ahead with as far as our non-regulatory strategy. Some comments received at the meeting included an ISR that should prioritize warehouses located in disadvantaged communities that are within 1,000 feet of a sensitive, nearby sensitive receptor. That the majority of truck crossings at Otay Mesa are from Mexican carriers domiciled in Mexico. However, there is currently no charging or fueling infrastructure for zero-emission trucks in Mexico, and that will not be built for many years. And thus, we should consider low-NOx trucks or natural gas trucks as an interim option for cleaner technology until zero-emission infrastructure is built in Mexico. Other comments included how much money was collected by South Coast Air Quality Management District through payment of mitigation fees and what was done with the funds they collected. And then we also got a comment about the district should conduct a survey of warehouse owners and operators to collect information to help with the development of an ISR. Next slide, please. And as another reminder, here's an overview of the ISR timeline we laid out for the board in our June 2023 governing board meeting, as well as the corresponding milestones. By summer of this year, APCD is hoping to identify possible regulatory and non-regulatory actions to be pursued, incorporating feedback and information we've received through the WWG, and then take any proposed recommendations to our Planning and Policy Committee and our governing board for consideration. By May 2025, we are hoping to conduct a public workshop to present the draft regulatory strategy and continue outreach with affected stakeholders and communities. And by September 2025, we'd be looking to go to the governing board for their consideration of any regulatory strategy if developed. Before moving on to the first discussion topic, I did want to briefly pause here to see if there was any questions or concerns about the timeline that we've had. This is something we've shared before, but just wanted to do it again as a reminder of where things are going with this effort.
Hey, Nick.
Yes, go ahead, Greg.
I received a question and I was not entirely clear on the answer to it, but I see that in December 24, that would begin the CEQA process. So no environmental work has been done so far, correct?
Correct. Yes, that is correct. Yeah, if a regulatory strategy is developed and or whatever direction we're going to be pursuing in regards to this effort, there really needs to be a defined project scope to be able to start any kind of CEQA or SIA processes. So that's one of the primary reasons that we haven't started those efforts yet. We don't have that clear scope yet.
Gotcha. And so between that December 24 and that June 25, where it says begin and then June 25 draft, what's the differentiation between those? And when would the board, APCD board, have a touch point there to give direction so that you could actually begin that work?
Well, I think what we're hoping to do is go to the board or the Planning and Policy Committee, and it hasn't really been decided on if it would be one or the other or both. But I think what we're hoping to do is have the work of the warehouse working group kind of keep going into the early part of the summer, and then bring some kind of direction to our board or the Planning and Policy Committee either before or in December 2024. I'm not even sure there is a governing board meeting in December 2024 exactly, but the hope was that we would be going to one of those bodies before the end of the year with some proposed consideration and direction of which direction we'd be heading. And then at that point, effectively the CEQA process and any environmental work would begin to start. Now that at that point, we would have a clear direction of where we're headed. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. And I guess kind of leading up to really where I was going ultimately, I think in my mind, it would be, speaking for my group, preferential to have the board weigh in on that. Having sat through the last Planning and Policy Committee meeting, I'm not exactly sure that that's reflective of the entire APCD board. I could be wrong about that, but the opinions there from the Policy Committee members seem pretty aligned in one direction. It'd be helpful to have the entire board weigh in on that, just given the magnitude of this and how much time and effort staff would have to spend going forward from their beginning CEQA and doing all of those, putting all the moving parts together based upon that input.
If I could address that for a second,
Sure.
Nick.
Go ahead, Paula.
The full board, the intent is to bring this to the full governing board by November of this year. They meet as a full board in November. The Planning and Policy Committee may consider this in advance, but it would take action of the full board in order for us to be able to move forward towards the CEQA analysis. So I think we're aligned on that.
Thank you, Paula. That's super helpful. It might be good to identify that then on the timeline, really just to make sure that it's clear to everybody that that decision point would be in November 24.
Sure. I mean, that could slip a little, obviously. You know, we have every intent to bring it forward this year, but that last meeting of the full governing board will be in November of this year.
Thank you.
Thank you both. We'll kind of modify that timeline to the best of our ability to make sure that that is all reflected moving forward accurately. Any other comments or questions on the timeline? Okay, I will, I think we'll go ahead and go to the next slide then. And I think I will now pass it over to Andrew Aguilar, who is part of the, who's representing Industrial Environmental Association, or IEA. And he's going to be presenting an analysis that they've conducted on warehouse indirect source emissions that they've independently prepared. So we'll go ahead and I'll toss it over to you, Andrew. And I think you're going to be running the slideshow on your own, correct?
Yes, sounds right.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Nick. And I appreciate the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for kind of lending me your ear to be able to speak to you and present to you some findings on a meta-analysis that I had put together towards Q3, Q4 of last year, and kind of had the benefit of being able to evolve this over time as informed from the working group meetings that we've been having month over month. And so very, very briefly about myself, like Nick had said, my name is Andrew Aguilar. On behalf of IEA today, I am a born and raised San Diego native, licensed professional engineer. I went into environmental engineering 10 years ago at San Diego State. And as far as I'm concerned, San Diego and San Diego County is one of the best places in the entire world. And it's something that I really want to see thrive and strike a great balance between having the necessary rules to ensure that we are having a just outcome when it comes to environmental impacts and effects, while also maintaining that economic stability and power that we need to keep that thriving moving forward. So with all of that in mind, this is kind of where this presentation came from, or this study came from. And it's interesting too, because this was something that kind of was born out of just a personal interest, a personal pet project of mine. This is something that I did apart from my professional gig, which is a full 40 hours and then some. But this was something that I bit down on and decided to keep working on. And I presented these initial findings to Jack Monger of the IEA, and we said, let's run with it. We think that there's something there. And so I'm excited to actually have this opportunity to share it with you all here this afternoon. So with that in mind, so you're not just looking at my face, let me remember to put up the slide deck. And if Nick or anybody from APC can just give me a thumbs up that it's presenting, everybody can see it.
Looks good.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Paula. That's it. So this is so it's essentially this. We're working together, trying to put together a feasibility to see what would make sense for a potential indirect source rule here in San Diego County. And it's an interesting story that as I was pulling through some of the publicly available data, I find that this is a story that has to kind of start in the past, then we update it into the present, and then we start to look forward into the future as far as then what can we expect from an outcome of a rule like this in the current environment of rules and regulations that we have already. So I'm going to play with the slide here just to see what kind of a delay we can expect. And it's a long one, it's about 5 seconds. Yep. So just as a very quick introduction, quick overview, we're aware that this was directed to the APCD by Assembly Bill 423, and the target is that we're taking a look at stationary sources that attract mobile sources of air pollutants, in particular diesel particulate matter and nitrous oxides, NOxes, and they're associated most with facilities as as specified in the rule or in the bill as targeting ports, warehouses, and distribution centers. And this is built upon the presumption that warehouses are a significant or a major contributor to mobile source pollution within San Diego County, even relative to all the other economic activity that happens throughout the county. And that's kind of where I got this initial impetus to start doing this study, because that's, from an engineering perspective, it kind of presumed a lot to me. And then I was recommended, because, you know, I'm going to take you through some numbers, I'm going to take you through a lot of charts. It was recommended to me that I provide something for you all to chew on and put the bottom line up front in the beginning. So that's something that we can hopefully walk towards you know, to the end, because I usually prefer something like the Socratic method, where, you know, I'll ask a series of questions to see if this kind of makes sense with my audience. And given the size of it, we can't really do that. So this is going to be my next best attempt. But kind of first and foremost, what kind of came from this meta-analysis of the data sources that I'll be walking through with you this afternoon was that the truck volumes in San Diego County, where the areas that had, you know, a significant warehouse presence, it didn't appear to be any higher than other high traffic, high pollution areas of San Diego County, which, you know, we were kind of hoping for a smoking gun from this analysis to say, yes, here there are warehouses, here there is pollution. That doesn't necessarily appear to be the case. And that makes it very difficult from a rule development perspective. The other part that I wanted to kind of share up front with you all is that emission models from the Air Resources Board from CARB are showing that we are rapidly approaching what I'm calling a floor in overall particulate matter emissions as this electric transition continues. And you know, PM 2.5 is the greater parent. DPM, as we know, is usually considered to be a subset of that. But in general, there's an increasing body of work from CARB and from other reputable agencies such as the Royal Society of Chemistry out in the UK. They're doing a lot of studies showing that PM in general, PM 2.5, especially from other parts of mobile sources, to appear to be just as or nearly as harmful as DPM itself. So that's something to keep in mind. And then lastly, where it's looking to be where you know, these disadvantaged communities that may be able to benefit the most, and this is one that I'm actually most excited about, that I would like to kind of harp on or emphasize today at the end of this, is that the census checks throughout El Cajon and Escondido are, according to Cal Enviroscreen, to be the most impacted for ozone, that are also disadvantaged communities. And so there's an opportunity perhaps in these census tracts in particular to either target either through the rule or through incentive programs that can hopefully benefit some people. So with that in mind, I have to wait for a few seconds, so I'll kind of smile and wait politely. But just know that, you know, again, the wonderful thing about our time and age is that there are a lot of different publicly available data sets and models that are trying to approach these problems from very different disparate angles. And so I knowing that there was very good Caltrans data, knowing that there was very good emissions data from CARB and from OEHA and the city of San Diego, I knew that it was sort of a matter of just finding a way, if you could blend them all together, join all of these different tables together and overlay them to kind of see visually where these problem areas in San Diego County are. And so that's also kind of the beautiful part about the analysis, is that I didn't have to go out there with a meter or anything like that. All I did was I took publicly available data and laid it on top of each other to see if I could determine any trends from it. And that's something that I'll be sharing with you and communicating with you today. And so just from a scientific perspective, I want to say here was my problem statement going in, was just that, you know, can a connection be observed between warehouses, truck volume, and DPM and ozone pollution through the San Diego census tracts? So that was kind of the question. Then the follow-up being from that would be, then would any additional regulation on warehouse facilities provide a material improvement to those emissions that we find to disadvantaged communities? Now, as we transition into the next screen, one of the things that I like to do is I like to show my work. So this isn't a particularly exciting slide. That comes much later, hopefully, for everybody. For everybody's as excited about data as I am, and I suspect I might be in the minority. But these are just on the screen, just a quick look at the data sets that were primary in this analysis, and they all come straight from the primary sources. So this is from Cal Enviroscreen 4.0. Besides being a very nice visualization tool to identify the disadvantaged communities throughout San Diego County, they also have a list of the tables and the factors that feed into that score. So that's what I'm referencing. Caltrans has some very interesting data on daily truck traffic counts throughout San Diego County along the freeway corridors. And I took a look at them back from 2016, and that's an important date that I'll touch upon in a little bit. And then the most recent ones that they have available from 2021 and 2022. Unfortunately, with big data sets like this, there's usually a year or two lag. And so 2022 is the most recent that I have. So that's the only reason why I stopped at 2022. There is no more. Then the other two sources that I was taking a look at were the emission factor model, MFAC, from CARB, which is the on-road mobile source emissions model that takes all of the information that facilities report up to CARB, and they produce it. So that's also what actually feeds into the Cal Enviroscreen. And then there's also the California Emissions Projections Analysis Model, CPAM, which is essentially the parent model. It takes mobile information sourced from MFAC as well as facility and non-road and area source emissions, and it puts everything together into one parent emissions model. So that's something that we'll also take a look at. And then the last part is I use Google Earth. And this was the last part. The hardest part was actually finding those warehouses throughout San Diego County. And so this is the one where, full disclosure, this is the one that took the most time. It was the most difficult to do because it involved me doing a painstaking search back through 2016 aerial imagery and current imagery to try and identify what are the most likely dead to rights warehouses through San Diego County. And so that, full disclosure, that's sort of the Achilles heel, or the weakness of the study, is that this was based off of having to rely on information from Google Earth. And what I'm hoping to is I can demonstrate to be a very trustworthy eye. Having been born and raised here in San Diego, I live in Chula Vista currently, proper old Chula Vista, and I'm not talking about East Lake. No offense to anybody who does live out there, but I don't consider that part of Chula Vista myself. And I also, throughout my career, have been working in Kearney Mesa, Oceanside, Miramar, Poway, National City, Otay Mesa. I've driven and worked all over the county throughout my life. And so I hope that would be able to influence or to inform the areas and the warehousings that are there, because I've driven past them throughout my life growing up. And so I'm going to pause for a few seconds, maybe grab a quick sip of water as the screen updates. Ooh. And so wanted to share the first part of the methodology of the analysis because I want to show my work. I want everything to be out in the open. And again, Nick, Paula, anybody can start to flag and wave me down and saying this isn't interesting anymore. I won't be upset. That's just how I am. But the first part of it was wanting to take a look at the Cal Enviroscreen census tract data. And so what we're seeing here on the screen is actually a portion of that I extracted. And so, like I mentioned before, Cal Enviroscreen has roughly 15 to 20 separate criteria that they use in order to identify what are your disadvantaged communities throughout San Diego County. And the ones that were the particular interest to me were ozone, PM 2.5, diesel PM, which is a subset of 2.5, and the traffic score. And as you can see on the slide, next to the red arrow, they had only given an approximate location. They give you like a list of zip codes and they say the approximate location is San Diego, which isn't particularly helpful when you're trying to do a visual analysis to match your data sets. And so all I had done was I had visited those Latin longs and the zip codes and assigned to them a more refined location, meaning that this was a more representative or more useful geographic location, so that when we start to do this analysis, we'd be able to know at a glance where that is. And it's not just San Diego, it's instead now going to be downtown San Diego or Coronado or the port side communities in San Diego, La Jolla, Mission Valley, et cetera. And based on those scores, what you see on the right-hand side with the yellow arrows are the percentiles for each of those census tracts. So each of these rows are census tracts within San Diego County from Cal Enviroscreen that have an associated score with them, meaning that what you see there, it's ranked currently from the worst diesel pollution down. And then we took an average of all of the subsets for each of those refined locations, if that makes sense. So I would take all of downtown San Diego census tracts, and I would take an average of all the diesel PM percentiles there, and I would do the same thing for traffic. And I had mentioned before that 2016 was the most important, or was a very important date, and it's that for as recent as a model as the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 is, which is from 2021, the data that they're referencing for the air pollution is actually surprisingly old. It's from 2016. And as far as the leaps and bounds that we have come from a technological and from a regulatory perspective, it's essentially a lifetime ago. So this is something important to consider. And it also informed me that when I was looking for warehouses throughout the facility, I would have to go back in time first to kind of get a snapshot of, okay, where were we then when the pollution was this bad on this screen? So something to please keep in mind. And the next hurdle then was to identify those warehouse spaces in San Diego County. And Nick had mentioned that we still, from the working group here in San Diego County, haven't come to a working definition of it yet, of a facility. What is a warehouse? And that's an important distinction that I also want to make with this study, is that the facilities that I identified were based on the definition as per the South Coast Rule 2305, and they define a warehouse as this. It says, as a building that stores cargo, goods, or products on a shorter long-term basis for later distribution for businesses or retail customers. Meaning that you can see the top two examples here, that the Costco distribution center made the list, the Costco retail store did not. It's another way to think about it. It's essentially that any storage place that's not used for point of sale is what kind of fit this definition. And so as I was going back and forth, spending hours bugging my wife, obsessing and kind of double craning my neck as I'm driving on freeways throughout San Diego County into seeing if that was a real warehouse or not. I identified over 300 facilities in this fashion, and I essentially just very grossly took a square footage of each of these facilities, knowing full well that there's office spaces and other flex spaces and use spaces in there. But for the sake of comparison for each of the regions, I took it based on the square foot of the building itself. And the last part of this analysis, so that's two of the data sets that we married together. The third one is going to be then the truck counts, the traffic counts. And so the really interesting thing about Caltrans's daily truck volume traffic is that it's very prescriptive, but it's only for the freeway artery systems here within San Diego County. So along each of these points in this data set was either a camera or an observer taking account of traffic going by. And they were able to distinguish between how many vehicles were going by, like just vehicles in total, versus how many trucks. And they even go so far as to say what category of truck that we're going through. And so all of the other busy data on the right-hand side is they're interesting to me imminently, but it didn't have as much importance in the overall analysis until very recently with the new 2022 data. And that's something that I'll get into a little bit later. So just some more foreshadowing. But the long story short of all of this analysis is that I assigned that refined location, that downtown San Diego, that Coronado, that Portside San Diego, to all three of these data sets. And now they were all married together and ready to visualize and see on the screen. So we're going to go into the first visualization. So we're going to look through a lot of graphs together. So please bear with me, and I'd be more than happy to kind of discuss any questions or any observations. I would love to hear this. And unfortunately, again, due to the nature of the medium, I was able to kind of stop and kind of ask, for the audience's perceptions on the data. But what we're looking at is the first of those graphs. And so we're looking at, for each of the areas down below, from no particular order, with Carlsbad, National City, Otay, Sorrento Valley, Tierra Santa, San Isidro. We're looking at the DPM score, which is the red line, and the traffic score, which is the green bar. For this as of 2016, just to see if there was a correlation between what were the busiest parts traffic-wise in San Diego County versus the diesel pollution score in that same area. And so by and large, with the exception of a few notable ones, which I would like to just point out, it seems to track, and it would make sense. You would think that where the busiest parts of San Diego County would be where you would have the worst air pollution from diesel vehicles. right? It kind of goes along with it. But there are some interesting things to note that that model starts to break down and deviate a little bit, most notably in the Otay Mesa, Portside San Diego, and downtown San Diego. And that was the first blush. The first thing that I asked was like, that's funny. That looks a little odd. I don't necessarily have much more to say for Otay Mesa other than that's very low relative to the amount of traffic. One of the things, as I was doing more of an analysis into the data, was that for each of the census tracts, the area isn't perfect as far as capturing the traffic counts. So this appears to capture a little bit of Mexico cross-border traffic from regular vehicles or from passenger vehicles commuting across as well. But then over on the port side and downtown San Diego part is that overall DPM score isn't just for mobile sources as produced in MFAC. It's also something to consider is non-road sources as well, ocean-going vehicles. Something to that effect might be playing into this analysis as well. I wasn't able to do a much deeper dive into that, but just knowing that there are other extenuating factors or aggravating factors to this analysis, but that's where you kind of see a very big disclosure or misclosure. The next graph I'm going to show you then is for each of those same areas, what were the daily truck volume counts. So hopefully this snaps in relatively quickly, so I don't have to keep filibustering and taking up your time. There we go. It's a snap. So you don't have to memorize the previous graph. It's gonna come back again, but just for you all to see is that this is the daily truck traffic that was observed and measured throughout San Diego County, and some of the busiest parts throughout San Diego County as far as truck traffic is concerned. And there should be no surprise going through the major arteries through San Diego County. We're in Escondido, Chula Vista, Miramar, El Cajon, the port side here in San Diego. And so just to take a look at this, and now in just a couple seconds, we're going to see them superimposed on top of each other. And it's a very interesting analysis to take a look at once you kind of know what we're looking for. So this should be all three of them combined together now, where we have the Calenvirus-Green DPM, we have the Calenvirus-Green traffic score, and now we have the Caltrans truck traffic data within each of those respective areas. And so what that tells me is that the proportion in which the traffic through some of these high traffic areas are relative to trucks and relative to their overall DPM score, that correlation starts to break down a little bit. And most notably, when we take a look at places like in Otay Mesa and in the Hillcrest North Park area, in Terrasana, Encinitas, even in Coronado, this assumption that where there's heavy truck presence, that there'd be a high DPM, it kind of starts to break down a little bit to me. And I'd be curious if anybody else, hopefully I haven't lost everybody or anybody yet, but hopefully this kind of conclusion starts to bubble up within some of you in the back of your minds. And so where does warehouses figure into this then? Because surely then, with that presumption that the busiest economic centers and activity portions of San Diego County would be the warehouses are. And so that's what the purple bar is. It represents the total square footage of all of the warehouses that I took a look at through San Diego County as far as my sample set goes. And how is it within those areas relative to the truck counts that we see on the freeways, relative then to their DPM scores. And this is where it starts to, kind of raise some interesting questions and some observations for me. And most notably is, again, we take a look at Otay Mesa, where far and away, even back in 2016, is where it had the most warehousing facilities, bar none relative to the rest of San Diego County, but also had one of the lowest truck trips as observed going along the 905 corridor relative to other extremely busy places like in Escondido, like in Kearny Mesa and Miramar. And so where we're trying to see is the smoking gun where the warehouses are relative to the rest of the economic activity in San Diego, that kind of starts to fall apart, at least as far as 2016 is concerned. Now, this is just 2016. So the next question that I started to ask myself was, okay, well, this might be a decent snapshot in the past, but now we need to figure out where we are now and then we take a look at where we're going with the rules. So one of the next things, and it was very serendipitous. I only had 2 data sets, for the longest time up until about last month is when the 2022 Caltrans data came out. And so having 3 years to be able to take a look at here, started to indicate a lot. So hopefully this snaps in relatively quickly. Wait a few seconds. There we go. So the light blue bar is 2016, the gray bar is 2021, and the blue-green bar is 2022. And for the most part, there was some slowdown in traffic in 2021 throughout the major corridors, and that kind of tracks. That makes sense given the COVID pandemic at the time. It's already so far in the rearview mirror. But there were some interesting upticks during that time, and most notably, it was in Otay Mesa, where as Amazon and other fulfillment distribution centers were being constructed and erected at the time, and people were buying from Amazon, doing online shopping in record numbers at the time. That shows in the data, where relative to 2016, so within a 5-year snapshot, the total amount of truck traffic almost doubled, or actually, sorry, almost doubled relative to 2016, which was very interesting. And what kind of shocked me, and what actually made me do a double take to make sure that I wasn't making a mistake with the data, was when I saw the 2022 numbers. And how I had mentioned before that the Caltrans data showed 2-axle versus 3, 4, and 5-axle trucks, it made me take a look at that data set. And what we're seeing across certain strategic parts of San Diego County where there's high economic activity is we're seeing the market kind of take over, where we're seeing a consolidation from the small 2-axle kind of delivery style trucks to a consolidation to the bigger trucks. So you're seeing a lower volume overall carrying the same or more amount of goods throughout San Diego County. And so I thought that was a very interesting observation to make, because one of the conversation topics that was discussed was these facilities, these owners need to reduce VMT. And it appears that they're doing so sort of naturally along with the market forces, because it makes economic sense to send less trucks to cram everything in and make fewer trips. And it looks, as far as I can tell with this initial data set, and I'd be very curious to see how 2023 and 2024 play out. I wouldn't be surprised though to see this trend. And so I want to, this will be the last graph, I swear. It's not all just graphs at this point. But the question being then is where are we now as far as traffic and warehouses are concerned? And going through to put the aerial imagery back to 2024, San Diego County being what it is, being as developed as it is, the place that really took off was Otay Mesa, far and away. And so the new purple lines kind of show just how massive of a warehouse presence that Otay Mesa now has. But relative to the trucking volume that we're seeing, and relative to the trucking there and versus the rest of San Diego County, it's again, it presents a very interesting kind of wrench in the spokes of the idea that warehouses are the primary drivers for, or a primary driver of air pollution throughout San Diego County. And so this is where it became very painfully apparent to me that 2016 data that we're relying on needs to now be current. Because now this is so old, this data is so non-representative of kind of what the current state is within San Diego County, is that now by relying solely on this emission information in CalEnviroscreen to make decisions it's more and more updated information is warranted, I guess, is the long story short of that. And so that's exactly what I did afterwards. And taking a look at these other emission models and these emission sources to kind of see where they're referencing, what they take a look at, and where is it going. And it was a very enlightening experience for me to take a look at MFAC and to know that there's the current bevy and suite of regulations that are in place now. We have the low carbon fuel standard, we have the EPA omnibus emission rules, the clean truck check, advanced clean trucks. Those are all modeled currently in the latest version of MFAC, with the exception of the advanced clean fleets rule. It's such a new rule that the impacts of those have not been modeled yet. And so what we're seeing here is taking a look out into the future, as well as the future past cast, is kind of what we're looking at with this graph here. And I think you can see my cursor, so I can actually use a little bit of a pointer. But we need to know first that that CARB's MFAC model accounts for an expanding EV population of trucks. It shows that there is an increased overall in vehicle miles traveled in VMT, and that the emissions associated with mobile sources are more than just what's coming out of the tailpipe. It's also what's wearing off of the tires and brakes. And it does account for regenerative braking for EVs, both from the passenger vehicle side and from the truck side. It applies what I could tell is a fairly conservative 50% reduction across the board. So that's what's baked into the chart that you're seeing here for NOx. And so when I mentioned that the data is old from 2016, you see that where we came from versus where we are now in 2023 and 2024, according to the model. And as we can tell, as we increase our electrification, as those regulations kick in, as we start to see a more transition to electric trucks throughout San Diego County, we stand to see up to a 40% reduction from 2024 in NOx, which is fairly significant. I wanted to share then the story about PM 2.5. I'm going to wait for a moment because I'll let the NOx information sink in there. But just knowing that where we came from in 2016 versus where we are versus where we're going. And so here's PM 2.5 from all sources, which is the orange line. And then here's the PM 2.5 from the exhaust, what's coming out of the tailpipe. This is our diesel exhaust that we're trying to eliminate by electrifying. So here's where we were in 2016. And so this is what we're seeing in those Cal EnviroScreen red lines, was 2016. And look at the progress we've made. This is how far we've come now, at least in the model. So this warrants confirmation and some extra monitoring, by my opinion. But this is where we are now. And where I start to see a distressing trend is actually that PM 2.5 will start to decrease year over year. And as we start to see more electric vehicles and more just overall vehicle traffic on the roads within San Diego County, we might expect to see us to come back to those emission points and potentially increase. And that's irrespective of the tailpipe. And so that's coming from CARB's model from MFAC. The other CARB model that I took a look at to kind of speak to this, right, and is this idea that, you know, the MFAC slide, like I mentioned before, feeds into CPAM, and it does not include for another major source of pollutants, particulate pollutants in the atmosphere, and that's with road wear as well. And so that's what the CPAM model captures. It includes emissions from all forms with mobile, stationary, off-road area sources. And so we see that as the green bar up at the top, the exhaust emissions can continue to decline year over year out to 2040. Those reductions in the tailpipe emissions associated with electric vehicles are taken over by increased emissions as modeled for tires, brakes, and road wear. And you know, I largely attribute it to the three below that you see, is that we have aging roads and infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers grades America's civil works and infrastructure at a D. So it's you know, 43% of America's roads are found to be in mediocre or worse, you know, ripe and ready condition for heavy electric vehicles to, you know, resuspend everything that was, you know, dusty and collecting on the roads back up into the air. And there's going to be more vehicles. So this is something then that we should be aware of. And so to kind of tie everything out here, there was, you know, unfortunately, the analysis raised more questions, I think, than answered them from my perspective. And I kind of wanted to share with you all in closing just some of them, because I don't want to take up much more of the time than I have to. But just one of the questions that came up to me was, okay, well, what proportion of trucks in San Diego then would a rule like this really capture? And because as we were observing in the data, that the high truck traffic areas in San Diego County didn't appear to me anyway, at least on this first blush with this analysis, to correlate very strongly with areas where the warehouses were located. It just, I was hoping for something like a smoking gun to see, like, okay, here's a cluster of warehouses, here's a cluster of trucks, makes total sense. That's very difficult to determine. The other major question would be, how much of a reduction in air pollution might we be able to expect from an ISR? And as we kind of saw, like through the same models, through the same data, and again, I will give the caveat that all models are wrong, but some are useful, as projected, overall emissions of PM 2.5, which are still harmful, which are still hazardous to human health, they're projected to stay relatively flat. They're projected to stay constant throughout this electric transition. But where the saving grace comes from, it appears to be with NOx, where it makes sense that we're going to see the biggest reduction that as modeled with these with CPAM and MFAC, an up to 40% reduction by 2040, and that's before taking into consideration the Advanced Clean Fleets rule and of course precluding any impact from an ISR. Now, one thought that occurred to me was that an ISR may help to accelerate with EV adoption, which is very possible. So if we accelerate with a bigger timeline, but there are some things that we do need to keep in mind from an infrastructure and an upstream supply chain perspective. And I'm not talking about necessarily even now the manufacturers of the vehicles themselves or the battery manufacturers. I'm talking about even going further upstream into the supply chain to the mineral mining and refining aspects of it. There's a whole trade war going on right now, kind of behind the scenes, as far as all these raw materials goes, that I've been following very closely out of an intense personal curiosity that I won't necessarily share. But we do need to be in mind that there are logistical bottlenecks and challenges that are being faced by the industry at large that we do need to be aware of, that just by increasing or by setting more aggressive timelines may not necessarily be resolved. The other question would be, would an indirect source rule help the communities with the worst air quality that we see? And so looking at, again, on the CalEnviroscreen data sets, there are roughly 184 census tracts that were above the 50th percentile as far as your overall score for CalEnviroscreen. There were 28 of those census tracts that had worse than average ozone pollution, which could be, a root cause can go back to NOx. So 28 out of 184. Looking at those census tracts, I was thinking, well, where are these census tracts? Who's most affected by ozone? And it turns out that largely it's El Cajon and Escondido. They take it away. So a question that came to mind for me most recently was, well, then would maybe an ISR targeted for those census tracts within the communities, or maybe a targeted incentive program for businesses and warehouses with high ozone census tracts, would that potentially be feasible? There are plenty of mom and pop workshops, auto body shops, 1 car, 2 car businesses out there, especially in the El Cajon and Escondido areas that may not necessarily fit the traditional definition of a warehouse. So this is potentially a gap analysis that could be pursued that might actually have a material benefit from an emissions perspective. And then lastly, kind of one of the one last thing before I get off of my soapbox, and I promise, is just that this idea that we do need to do a better job at communicating the overall risk of PM 2.5 to San Diego's communities. Again, the body of research from folks like CARB and like from the Medical Research Council in the UK, they're finding that PM 2.5 from brake dust, from road wear, and from the tires can be equally as hazardous to your health. It's the same metabolic pathway for doing damage to the body as diesel pollution, diesel exhaust. So the question then gets raised, well, wouldn't electrification dramatically reduce the health risk for the people that we're trying to serve fairly? And that's an open-ended question. It's up for debate, but it's something that, if it's even close to what the models are showing, I think would be warranting some more discussion before we proceed with the rule, or have that expectation that we're going to be dramatically improving public health, which is ultimately the most important part that I got into as a profession, and that I know that many of us here got into as well. So with all that, I'll stop talking. Nick, I'll hand it over to you. But if anybody had any questions or observations, and if there are no questions, I either explained it perfectly or not at all. So it's got to be one or the other, right? So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's clear you put a lot of work into this study that you conducted. And I would just like to kind of further ask the group just to get some feedback for you. And if there's any questions or comments, like Andrew said, if there's any, just to kind of get the creative juices flowing, is there any aspects of the study that you agree with, find interesting? Are there gaps in the study? Are there any aspects that you feel require more analysis or that you disagree with? So just kind of throwing those out there for the group for to try and get some good discussion going. We'll probably spend 5 or 10 minutes on this, but and then we have a couple other items to get through in the agenda, but I just wanted to see if there was any comments or feedback here. Ariel from CARB.
Hi, Nick. Hi, Andrew. I had a couple thoughts, as well as I wanted to ask a couple questions to clarify some of what you did include in your analysis. I'm Carb. I'm the manager over our team that does actually our state SIP strategy, helps coordinate all the programs that are going to go into the SIPs that are going to help benefit ozone and PM reductions and everything else. So very familiar, of course, with our inventories and stuff like that. There's a couple points of clarification I wanted to make first. Some of, I think, a lot of what you showed there, really good data, and you touch on like the PM, of course, the direct PM emissions, direct, NOx emissions. And I think, you've made some conclusion statements about, direct PM emissions are going, down with respect to tailpipe and such, but potentially going up or leveling out due to the, tire wear, brake wear, road wear. We are seeing that stuff for sure. And that is stuff that CARB is thinking about. I just want to also note that, NOx, of course, is also a contributor to secondary PM. So, that's not something obviously we can show via just the emissions. It takes, air quality photochemical modeling and also like, certain monitoring to see what the impact of each pollutant is on on secondary PM in the county. So that's also totally a factor. And so NOx reductions are also going to contribute to overall reduction of PM in the county as well. We can be pretty certain that NOx is a strong contributor to PM since it is across the rest of the state as well. Then as far as the CPAM model and stuff that you used there, I noted you have 2019 CPAM, which I know is our public CPAM. That one I just wanted to point out that does not incorporate yet MFAC 2021. It's based on an MFAC 2017 model. So I'm not sure, if that house, it's specified somewhere in the documentation on there. But just to clarify that those sets of data you used from MFAC directly and then from that CPAM are not 100% one-to-one. That CPAM model, it has even less of our, CARB reductions programs and stuff like that accounted for it because, it's obviously a few years older.
That's a good distinction.
Sorry.
No, that's a fantastic distinction, and I appreciate that because it would make sense that you would have other models in development, and it should have kind of occurred to me that having different years will obviously have different impacts. But let me ask this, Ariel, if you don't mind, kind of fielding it back. Does the Air Resources Board have an idea of sort of the reduction in overall PM that you might be able to associate as a secondary knockoff effect from reduced NOx?
So because San Joaquin, I'm just about to talk about the areas we are doing PM SIPs for right now. Because we haven't done a PM SIP in San Diego in some time, we are thinking that it's possible they are going to be designated non-attainment for the new standard. But so we're just starting to kind of dive into, what things might look like, what is going to have an impact on, to what extent, I think, on the PM levels in San Diego. So we don't really have recent modeling. I don't know, Nick, if you can speak to anything specific, but like that would kind of say, to which pollutants are going to have more impact, of course, between NOx, SOx, ammonia, and ROG, since those are all the other PM2.5 precursors. But it is something we're going to be looking into over the coming years and be able to speak to more. But NOx is a heavy contributor across the state to PM2.5 levels. So besides it's South Coast, they have also ammonia they've determined is significant. So the most nearby, I would say, recent modeling that we have would be that.
Yeah, I would just add to that, and you're correct, Ariel. We don't really have any recent kind of modeling that would tell us one way or the other right now, and that's what we're hoping to get through this process with CARB and others with the new PM standard. But I would probably say the same thing. To look at regions that are nearby are probably a useful tool for us to kind of get a sense of perhaps what may be going on in San Diego, South Coast, to some extent Imperial, although there's some aspects in Imperial that it probably doesn't completely apply, but being our neighbors, to the east in that county, weather, other factors being along the border, just those are caveats I would just throw out with the Imperial example. But that's really what we would have to look at right now with the absence of other modeling that we don't have at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And so actually, I was taking a look recently because I knew, and I don't want to keep taking the conversation, but I was taking a look at the CPAM model outputs for PM 2.5. And again, because it's prescriptive of all the sources, what I found really interesting was actually kind of where those other sources were coming from. And if I'm reading this correctly, some of the biggest contributors come from construction sites and projects, restaurants like barbecue joints, like wood burning, deep fat fryers, jet craft from military, and even wildfires. Wildfires appear to take the cake as far as everything. So I guess I'm just with all of those numbers in mind, if I like sorted it from top to bottom, it's to your point, Ariel, that you can't quite model the secondary reductions. It's just, I'd be curious again just to kind of see where that fits, because as largely stated with like these discrete numbers on the model outputs, it looks like there are other major contributors to PM 2.5 just as a whole relative to just the mobile sources to kind of take into consideration. So that's why I was curious. That's why I asked, was like, how much could we expect? Just more out of a professional curiosity at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and what you're looking at in CPAM, yeah, it's just direct emissions, right? So yeah, it doesn't take into account anything secondary. So that I think is the real key thing to keep in mind. But yeah, there's definitely some other heavy hitting categories, especially ocean going vessels, aircraft, things that we at state level and the district level don't have the authority to regulate, that we are doing what we can at the state level. Also things like ISR and stuff can potentially have some impacts there. But so lots of things to keep in mind. But thank you for the presentation. Forgot to say that. Really helpful and really interesting kind of take and look at things there.
Thanks.
Great. And before you leave, Ariel, I do see a question in the chat that was directed, I believe, to you or to Angelica. When will the latest CPAM, which is being used to make regulations, be available to the public? I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
No, I don't have a direct, like a firm answer. Yeah, we tend to update it kind of every major SIP cycle that we go through. So the 2019 CPAM that is online is from like the 70 pp ozone SIP cycle. So it is a couple years back now. We are just starting, of course, the 9 microgram kind of planning process towards those SIPs, but that'll be a couple more years. I actually can touch base with our inventory team and find out, because we do have some more recent ones that we're using right now for the development of South Coast and San Joaquin PM SIPs. But we don't have statewide tools for those. That's the main caveat there, and why we don't usually publish them unless we have statewide tools and everything that are available. But so I can kind of follow up and see if we have anything that we are planning to put out in the near future as far as publicly. But as to the regulation side of it, what's important to note there is, each of the regulatory teams work, our inventory is constantly being updated, right? Different categories, there's so many different pieces to it. So the inventory teams are working really closely with our regulatory teams throughout the regulatory process, so that whatever is actually the very most up-to-date thing for that given category is what's being used for regulations. Usually it's not necessarily super consistent with our most recent CPAM or the most recent publicly available CPAM. So just want to caveat that as well.
Great. Thank you, Ariel. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there. Appreciate it. I see Carl Aldinger's hand, sorry. And then I think at this point, unless there's other comments, I see Nicholas Powell's hand just raised. So we'll go to Carl first, then Nicholas Powell, and then I think we'll probably have to move on to the next presentation. So I'll turn it over to Carl.
Thank you. Andrew, when you were doing this data analysis, were you considering the sizes of, I see we started with census tracts, and you had to somehow correlate that to, in your graphs, you're showing entire city names. And we know these cities are different sizes, but I think what you're really showing is these are areas within spaces, not necessarily city bounds. So I was wondering if you try to normalize for the area involved, because when we're talking about truck trips, one of the things that we have to consider is the freeways that are running through these corridors. And then obviously if you're looking at a very small city versus a very large city and those truck trips, suddenly the data doesn't seem to be very fair to put on the same graph unless you're somehow normalizing for that. I was wondering if you attempted to do that.
No, that's a great question. The short answer is no. It was just that I was trying to, this part of the meta study, because I was doing it pro bono, didn't want to go that far into the weeds on it in full disclosure, but just in joking aside, you do bring up a really good point, though, that again, the caveat to the transport daily truck traffic data that we have available is contingent along observation points along the major arteries of San Diego County, and the number of those observation points around them, was maybe not ideal to be able to capture and do that sort of normalization. So there's that full caveat there that this was, more of a correlational study as opposed to trying to do a hard number. We're going to normalize areas for that distribution for that exact reason, was that the data wasn't necessarily there to be able to do so in an easy way, as far as I can tell. It was enough of a challenge just to try and put a location to the zip code into the census tract to be able to kind of make sense of it, if that makes sense. But you bring up a very good observation, though. That is true.
Okay, we'll go to Nicholas Paul.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for the presentation. I have a quick comment and then a question. I think as we're kind of going through the presentation, I think one thing that I want to kind of emphasize is from the perspective of community members, particularly in the AB 617 communities of the Port Side and in the border region. I think the concern with indirect source traffic is the impacts kind of in the immediate vicinity, right? So we have a lot of residents that are living right next door to these warehouse facilities that are attracting heavy duty truck traffic. And so what I think the modeling that you're showing, while interesting, I think it's focusing on on the main arteries of freeways and heavy corridors. And so I think it kind of misses the purpose of I think the reason why we'd like to see an indirect source rule, to address kind of the immediate impacts on folks living so close to these facilities. My question is kind of on the truck traffic, the truck data that you were using. Since it focused on highways, would heavy duty trucks traveling down, like between port terminals, for example, in the Port Side, would those trucks be counted in that data set? Would those trips be counted in that data set, or is?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. The answer is no. And then that's under the full understanding, as I was taking a look at the data, was that and that was something that the district and Nick and I, we were trying to come to an agreement. It was like, what data sets are there that can help us get to that street level side so we can get that level of granularity? And then unfortunately, it's not there, is the long story short of it. Short of doing, I guess what would appear to be like a facility-wide survey on each of the facilities that the district would identify, there isn't a publicly readily available source that isn't a model, which I have my own reservations on, versus what's actually been observed, which is as far out. So there's a trade-off when it comes to having a level of data that some engineers would trust, like myself, versus the specific details of the data. And I was to speak to the point, I guess, briefly on the idea that the immediate impacts for the people living nearby. That's absolutely true. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so concerned about the overall emissions associated with trucks, because even if you were to remove the tailpipe aspect of it, you're taking a look at, as trucks roll by in the streets, you're still breathing in the brake dust that gets whipped up, tires, and the road dust. And to be fair to Ariel, the CPAM model data sources were all for kind of the non-atmospheric interactions with NOx. So even that aside, that's a bigger proportion of PM 2.5 that the graph wasn't showing. It was showing the mobile sources only. So that's something to keep in mind. And so that's where I get the most concerned, is because I have a kid myself, 2 years old, we live next to a freeway, and that's something that I'm always constantly kind of keeping in mind. So yeah, but you do bring up a good point, though. Again, the data set is what it is, and that's what we were using to help inform kind of this decision-making process, knowing full well that it's not perfect or ideal by any means.
Okay, there's clearly a lot of interest in this, so I'll probably give it another 5 minutes with the comments and questions that we have, but then we do need to kind of move on there's a lot of good discussion happening. So if we need to continue, we can. We would just may need to push another item to a future meeting, but that may be okay too. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jack. I'm sorry, Jack Munger, and then I'll turn it over to Board Member Shu, and then I'll refresh what we've gone through in the chat for others who can't see the chat after that. So Jack Munger.
Thanks, Nick. I'll make this quick. I know you're trying to move this along. And while I'm kind of providing the question, Andrew, if you could pull up slide 11, because Councilmember Bush was trying to get here for the other part of your presentation, but I think he missed a better part of it, particularly that slide. Reason being, I know he has expressed strong concern about impacts to residents in National City. And I think it's important to note what you observed in that slide there where it shows National City. And maybe you could just talk about, as you see those two representations of truck volume, warehouse, and Cal Enviroscreen for DPM being so far apart compared to many of the other areas. I mean, what conclusion can be drawn from that? Would you suggest, Andrew?
I think that given the caveats that that Carl and Nick had pointed out very, very aptly, and that I would agree with as well, is that would appear that those numbers are a bit of an artifact, given that just the number of observation points throughout National City. But as far as like the low truck traffic that you see there, but as far as the warehouse is concerned, I do want to point out too that the remaining portion of National City is distinct from kind of the National City portion of the port side. So there's that distinction to be made too. But again, it speaks to the point of other areas also, like I had noticed in Hillcrest and North Park, as you have these high traffic areas with a lot of vehicles passing through. The greatest point, the greatest takeaway that I would find is that to stand with some certainty and say that the smoking gun is going to be these distribution sources relative to all of the other economic activity going on, your Doritos truck like refilling at 7-Eleven, the gas station trucks filling in, your auto repair guys, your glass guys, everything going on, all the commerce within San Diego County, to be able to pinpoint that one source to solely distribution centers, I don't think is supported by the data at this time.
Okay, I will now turn it over to Board Member Shu.
Thank you, Nick. Let me just start out with a few things, and I'll make a final comment as well. I think one of the first questions, I think, Andrew, which I really appreciate your study here, because it's given me a lot of information that is useful. But one of your first analysis or questions as you start out with is, what's the relationship? I think it's more, how can we make a rule that will work to reduce illness in these communities? So to me, that's the broader issue, which leads to me in terms of the data that I see. I think, to me, there was not a lot of question or not a question, but it wasn't surprising to me that we see a lot of things that didn't make sense, because I think some of the data is just collected on different bases, right? Like Caltrans and traffic, or the number of warehouses and how it affected National City. I think the data piece that we're missing, or the graph we're missing, is an amount of illness, hospital admissions for asthma, for cancer. And to me, I think we're going to find another different kind of correlation if we do that. And we know from other studies on health studies, that's the case, that people who live closer to freeways are sicker for and presumably from the pollution that they receive. But I think the data is great, and I really appreciate it, Andrew, and that this is good information for us. What it tells me, though, is APCD is not going to solve the entire problem, no matter what kind of rule we come up with and how we go forward. A lot of this data, I hope, is useful for SANDAG, because SANDAG does have a regional approach, and in the next regional plan, we'll have to address health impacts and come up with a plan that reduces health impacts, a transportation plan that the board moved in that direction, the SANDAG board. So I thought I was going to get information for APCD from this meeting, but now I'm going to take away information that I'm going to be able to take to SANDAG. So thank you, Andrew, for the report. And which I hope, Nick, this will give you a segue to your next thing, because then it's going to be, involve actual truck trips, which we need to reduce. So data on truck trips I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Great, thank you, Board Member Shu. And yes, this is going to be a segue to our next aspect of the presentation, which will cover some of the stuff that's the district's working on that is kind of interconnected to some of the stuff that IEA is doing. So appreciate the comments. I did just want to, before we move on, I just wanted to touch base on some of the comments that was in the chat. I saw Craig Benedetto, right, that wondering how the information like this from IEA was going to get incorporated into the decision making, or would it be the district be doing this kind of analysis with perhaps more information, including more data from CARB to help the board determine what is the right approach. And Kathy from APCD responded that the district analysis will include many sources of data and the most up-to-date data available to us. And I saw Lauren Cazares from the chamber and Alejandra confirming that it was an interesting, good point from Greg, and that the results, I think it was Alejandra that wrote that the results of the study were eye-opening. If there was no correlation between warehouses and polluted communities and truck traffic, at least from what she understood, it would seem that alternative proposals that really help the underserved communities should be developed. And there's a couple other points, it looks like, from Craig and Kathy, but I'll let others feel free to chime in on that as we have to move on, I think, to cover our other topics. So thank you, everyone, for the really good feedback. And I want to thank Andrew again for doing this, a lot of analysis here, and like you said, pro bono. So really appreciate you coming to spread the share your information and your analysis with us. So really do appreciate it. Okay, so I will go ahead and I think we'll shift gears and get back into our APCD presentation. And for this next one, we're going to be talking about APCD's truck trip rate analysis we're doing, and I will turn it over now to Randy.
Thank you, Nick. We'll now discuss APCD's current work on analyzing warehouses and their associated truck trip rates. At the governing board meeting in June 2023, the board directed staff to prioritize under-resourced communities and consider smaller warehouses, which are those with floor areas less than 100,000 square feet. The goal of the truck trip rate analysis is to address the board's direction, obtain truck trip data specific to San Diego County, estimate truck trip rates for warehouses, use the truck trip rates to estimate baseline emissions from warehousing activities, and ultimately estimate emission reductions that will result from proposed strategies. Next slide, please. The truck trip rate analysis began first with APCD developing an inventory of warehouses throughout the county using data obtained from a real estate information service called CoStar. Staff later obtained transportation modeling data from Sandag. This modeling data of heavy-duty truck volumes used 2016 as the base year in support of Sandag's 2019 Federal Regional Transportation Plan. Things to note are that it is modeling data instead of actual truck counts, and the data is several years old. Nonetheless, it is the most recent publicly available data set that staff can utilize for this analysis. The CoStar and Sandag data were then incorporated into a map created by the county's GIS department. Staff are currently looking at several warehouse clusters throughout the region and analyzing the truck volumes on street segments near warehouses to estimate warehouse truck trip rates. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the previous slide, staff will be looking closely at the heavy-duty truck volumes in 10 distinct areas of the county. The first shown here is the Portside community. This map shows the locations of approximately 442 warehouses that are within the Portside area. There are about 5 warehouses with floor area of 100,000 square feet or more, 24 warehouses between 50,000 and 100,000 square feet, and 413 warehouses that are smaller than 50,000 square feet. Next slide, please. The next area of interest is the international border community. This map shows the locations of approximately 302 warehouses that are within the IBC. There are about 46 warehouses with floor area of 100,000 square feet or more, 56 warehouses between 50,000 and 100,000 square feet, and 200 warehouses that are smaller than 50,000 square feet. Many of these are concentrated around the 905 corridor, adjacent to the Otay Mesa Port of Entry crossing. Next slide, please. In addition to Portside and IBC, staff will be looking at 8 additional warehouse clusters located throughout the county. 3 clusters are shown on this slide: Oceanside and Vista, Carlsbad and Vista, and San Marcos and Escondido. Next slide, please. The next 3 clusters shown are Sorrento Valley, Miramar, and Poway. Next slide, please. And finally, the last 2 clusters shown are Kearney Mesa and El Cajon and Santee. Next slide, please. This slide shows a zoomed-in map of the Kearney Mesa area as an example. Sandag's modeled truck volumes are shown in different colors, with a legend shown on the right. The truck volumes are the number of heavy-duty trucks traveling a particular street segment on a typical day in San Diego. The lines in bright red indicate the highest truck volumes of 1,000 heavy-duty trucks or more per day, which are typically on freeways with pass-through truck traffic. Using the truck volume and warehouse location data, staff are working on estimating truck trip rates at warehouses in each of the various cluster areas discussed. Staff plans to present their findings at the June or July WWG meeting. Next slide, please. This slide presents a comparison of IEA's warehouse analysis and APCD's truck trip rate analysis. To recap, there are some things to highlight about the IEA warehouse analysis. Truck volumes are annual average daily truck counts collected by Caltrans, utilizing data from 2016, 2021, and 2022. Those truck volumes are determined at major freeway junctions, but not at exit. A sample size of approximately 305 warehouses were identified using Google Earth for the study. The goal of the study is to determine the correlation between truck traffic and DPN levels with warehouse spaces. The study attempts to answer a problem on a region-wide level. The following are highlights about APCD's truck trip rate analysis. Truck volumes are from Sandag's model data using 2016 as the base year. The level of detail for the data gives estimated truck volumes on specific street segments. Staff is working with an inventory of approximately 6,700 warehouses throughout the county based on information from CoStar. Goal of the analysis is to estimate truck trip rates going to and from warehouses. APCD's analysis attempts to answer a question on a local source-specific level. To summarize, the IEA warehouse analysis and APCD's truck trip rate analysis use different methodologies and data sources in an attempt to answer 2 different problems. Next slide, please. We'd like to now pause the presentation to hear any questions or comments you may have on the truck trip rate analysis. We have some questions for you to think about. What are you hoping to see out of APCD's truck trip rate analysis? And are there aspects that you think should be factored in or out?
Thank you, Randy. And I see a comment was included in the chat, so I wanted to go ahead and read that out from Matt Trano from IDS Real Estate, noting that APCD should consider the trucking logistics associated with the various types of warehouses and industrial development in San Diego County. By way of example, most larger warehouse buildings in San Diego serve as the regional distribution centers and are served by longer haul trucks working a point-to-point route originating from outside of San Diego County. So that's a good comment, Matt. Thank you for the comment there. Let's see. I think I saw Andrew's hand up first, and then Jack Munger.
Thanks, Nick. Just you know, we talked about the CoStar data, you know, before, and I think that just as a general comment that, you know, at the data that were did as part of the analysis made it very clear to me that I think before proceeding with either of the models that we had put together, really should come to the definition on a warehouse is. Several of the facilities that I saw in the area, in particular, that's where I used to work for SDG&E. That CoStar data, rural office building spot of SDG. That's what we really do need to.
Andrew, where you're breaking up, we're missing most of what you're saying. Again, at least I didn't do that during your presentation.
Yeah. If I can't type it in.
Yeah, we were catching every 3/4 of a second, but it was cut out a little bit. But if you can type it in, that would be great, Andrew. Just before moving on, I see he already wrote it. So the definition of a warehouse for this working group in the rule is critical because this data set is likely capturing facilities, not warehouses. And point understood, Andrew. We're going to be hopefully getting to the next portion of our presentation, which hopefully will address to some extent some of that question. So to be determined on that, but thank you for the comment. Jack Munger and then Alejandra.
Thanks, Nick. I just wanted to ask Randy if he could go back and that statement. I missed part of what you were saying when you pointed out that the two studies, the IEA and the APCD studies, were focusing on different problems. Which of the two problems did you see in that regard? Two different problems, I should specify, I guess.
I think what we were, I don't know if we want to bring up the slide again, Kathy, but I think what we were kind of landing on was kind of the latter points of what we shared for each of the analysis where, you know, I think in the IEA presentation, we were kind of looking at things at more of a region-wide level and trying to look at it on a region-wide basis. And on our end, we're kind of looking at it on a more localized level, on a street level segment. So they're kind of complementary in some senses, the analysis, but they're kind of going at it from two different angles. And so the problem statements or the presumptions that you might get from one or the other can be a little different, I think, depending on what angle you're kind of coming at it from. So I think that was kind of the point we were trying to make there.
I understand. Gotcha. Thanks.
No problem. Let's see, Alejandra?
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon. And I think that the question we're trying to answer that I think Andrew answered that I think you're going to address in these two studies is, again, the correlation between truck traffic and diesel particulate matter. And I think the border is really a very unique area. And even if you relate truck traffic to DPM, it's really not going to show the true picture. And I say this because we have 4,000 trucks lined up every single day with their engines on, right on the border with San Diego County. And then basically they're waiting it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could be 20 minutes. And I don't think we'll see the diesel particulate matter, but the truck traffic won't really relate to that, which is why we've shared that if the APCD could be pushing for a reservation system at the cargo port, then all those trucks would not be lined up with their engine there, queued up, and with all this diesel particulate matter. And I think that would be an immediate pollution reduction, which is what we all want. But I don't think you're incorporating that in either of these two studies. So I guess my question or comment is, I think you should do that because we're a very unique area, and I think it's important because it could really reduce pollution for the communities.
Yeah, thank you, Alejandra. I think what's important to keep in mind is, you know, our analysis, at least on our end, is going to be, we're kind of at the early phases of it, quite frank. And so we're going to be building what we can into it. We haven't even gotten to the point where we can confidently share the information we've starting to see from it. So we need to kind of further refine it. And so if there are opportunities to look at building in the different metrics, different layers upon layers about what we could do to see what could be done, I think we're certainly open to that if it makes sense. Just to be determined, I think, on where our analysis is going. But we're learning things from the IEA presentation that was given. We're learning things on our end behind the scenes on different things we're doing as well. So, we're definitely not quite all the way there yet in terms of how we've been looking at it. Let's see. I'm not sure whose hand up. I'm going to go to board member Shu.
Thank you. I just might want to make a quick comment. Alejandra, your comment is heard very well at Sandag and also made by your council member, Vivian Moreno. We draw a hard line at the border, international border, but we shouldn't. It should be a soft line. Data across the border counts. It affects us in terms of pollution, traffic, and everything else. So we've been pushing for our models, our mapping, to not stop at the international border. It needs to continue past it in terms of data and information we use for analysis. I'm also quite worried about induced demand of increasing our truck crossing lanes. So if it's this phenomenon of induced demand works for these crossing areas, international crossing areas, similar to lanes on a freeway, we're making things worse, not better with what we're doing. So I think we have to consider many issues as we go forward. But I really appreciate your comment, Alejandra.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Michelle's. Sorry, was someone jumping in to speak there?
No.
Oh, I thought it. Okay, sorry. I thought I heard something. I'm going to go to Michelle and then Paula, and then I see Alejandra's hand up again if there's another comment. And then I want to go ahead and get to the comments in the chat as well. And then I think we'll move on to the next item. So Michelle?
Hi, I just wanted to echo the comments earlier from Andrew and what's also in the chat about this slide with 6,700 warehouses using CoStar data and 305 at the IEA analysis. I think that you really need to go through each of these 6,700 warehouses and see if they really meet the definition and revise your analysis before it gets presented to us. And there were comments in the chat about all available data sources. I think this goes into, or it's also refers to a comment beforehand about the different data sources available. I think it's important to use all of the available data sources and then use that and your analysis with the different clusters of warehouses to target your next step in data collection, such as doing surveys of warehouse operators.
All right. Thank you for the comment, Michelle. Paula.
Thank you. And thanks for the comments that have been made so far. I just wanted to echo a couple of the comments. To Alejandra's point, I also am concerned that idling emissions are being missed, and I don't know that there's a good way to capture that in the different data sets that we've been looking at for purposes of traffic counts. And so it's also an issue for a lot of the portside communities as well, as trucks are queuing to get in and out of the community. So it's just an issue to highlight. And I do believe that the border SERP ended up with a recommendation that was supportive of the reservation system that you're talking about as one of the objectives to reduce diesel pollution. So I do think it could be complementary to the efforts that we're talking about here. And then just to the point about data, I do want to assure all the stakeholders that, anytime we go to do a rule, there's going to be some uncertainty. Kathy, made this comment in the chat, and I just wanted to highlight it, that we have to often work with imperfect data. At the end of the day, we're going to bring forward the best data that we can to make the best recommendation that we can to our governing board, but it's never going to be perfect. And so there may be, if there's a regulatory aspect to this effort, there may be a survey requirement that comes at the beginning of a rulemaking process or something along that line, but I just wanted to highlight that point again because I see that comment coming up in the chat.
Thank you, Paula. And I see Alejandra's hand up, and then I'll go through the chat, and I think we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch base on what Chairman Shu mentioned about induced demand for truck cargo lanes, additional lanes. And I think that came up at the last meeting. I certainly don't believe that is the case because it really depends on supply chains and basically the products that are being ordered from the manufacturing facilities or from commodities that are being purchased in Mexico. But my point to APCD staff is there must be some research on that topic, I would think. And instead of assuming, I think maybe we should look into that. It doesn't make sense to me at all that would happen, but I'm just throwing it out there that maybe we should look into that and just document it.
All right. I do want to catch up on the chat. Thank you for the comment, Alejandra. We can certainly attempt to look into that and see what we can find on that. On the chat, I just wanted to highlight, I'm not going to read maybe everything verbatim, but Matt Trano mentioned that the long haul trucks are typically hauling fully loaded 53-foot trailers, which are once loaded on once unloaded leave San Diego County. Alternatively, some smaller warehouse buildings support local retail network distribution. These smaller buildings are typically served by smaller delivery trucks, but these trucks run multi-point routes delivering throughout San Diego County over the course of 6 to 8 hours. Craig Benedetto says, seems like we should be trying to use all available data sources. If Caltrans has actual real-time counts and information that is more up to date, it should be used perhaps in conjunction with other data sources. The use of modeling and estimates is one means, but imperfect, and the extrapolation to that to suggest that a truck on the road in a high traffic area with multiple potential stopping points is simply going to and from a warehouse may not be correct. The goal should be not to just make an impact, but to make a meaningful impact. So knowing the facts as to key significant sources is key. Andrew says, just to clarify, this is from Sandag's behavior model. I think that's correct. Is that right, Randy? I want to double check.
Yeah, it's the activity-based model, version 2 that was used for the 2019. The current model that Sandag is working on, ABM 2 plus is going to be used for the most up-to-date plan.
Great, thank you, Randy. And then Matt Trano looks like he agrees with Alejandra's point. Improving the truck queuing at the border can result in significant improvement in diesel pollution. All right, well, that's a lot of good feedback here. I see Jack Shu also weighed in to Alejandra's point. Your question is one that I've asked Sandag staff on many months ago. I'll pursue the question some more. So great. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion. I think we'll move on to the next topic, which is going to touch on our working definition of warehouses for our working group. And I think what I'm going to do in the interest of time is probably combine our last comment period. So I think what I want to do, Randy, if you want to go ahead and go through the working definition slides, and then I'll follow up and proceed right into the Planning and Policy Committee update. And then we'll just have one last comment session to close out our meeting today. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nick. During the WWG meeting in December, staff presented 6 definitions of warehouse from various sources for consideration. The definition that received the most favorable feedback was the one presented on the screen. This definition defines a warehouse as a building that stores cargo, goods, or products on a short or long-term basis for later distribution to businesses and/or retail customers. Staff will be using this as a working definition for warehouse for discussions within the WWG meetings. Staff does not intend to include in this working definition grocery and other retail stores and drop yards which do not have buildings for storing goods. Other items of note: warehouses located on Port Tideland property that meet the definition as proposed would also be subject to an ISR if one is adopted. Additionally, if an ISR is eventually developed, APCD staff would likely include a pathway that would enable facilities to report infrequent or low truck trip rates, which may allow the facility to be exempt from some requirements of an ISR. Next slide, please. Staff proposes two additional working definitions for warehouse size and warehousing activities. Warehouse size means the indoor floor space measured in square feet of an individual warehouse building that may be used for warehousing activities. Warehousing activities means operations at a warehouse related to the storage and distribution of goods, including but not limited to the storage, labeling, sorting, consolidation, and deconsolidation of products into different sized packages. The following are not considered warehousing activities in these definitions: supporting office administration, maintenance, manufacturing areas, or retail sales areas open to the general public. These areas are not included under warehousing activities if they are within the same warehouse building and are physically separate from the warehouse area. Next slide, please. For clarification purposes, this slide shows a simplified example of warehouse size and how it relates to applicability. This scenario considers a strategy, whether a regulatory or non-regulatory approach, that applies to warehouses with 100,000 square feet or more of indoor floor area. The sample warehouse building has 100,000 square feet of indoor floor space. Half of the warehouse is used as office space and the other half used for warehousing activities. Because the space used for warehousing activities is 50,000 square feet, which is less than the possible applicability threshold of 100,000 square feet, the strategy would not apply to this example warehouse. Next slide, please. Another possible scenario considers a strategy, whether a regulatory or non-regulatory approach, that again applies to warehouses with 100,000 square feet or more of indoor floor area. The sample warehouse building is bigger and has 150,000 square feet of indoor floor space. 2/3 of the warehouse, or 100,000 square feet of indoor floor space, is used for warehousing activities. The remaining third of the warehouse, or 50,000 square feet in total, is split between office space and manufacturing space. Because the space used for warehousing activities is 100,000 square feet, which is at the possible applicability threshold of 100,000 square feet, the strategy would apply to this example warehouse. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Randy. And I think we'll probably circle back to some of these questions, but I do want to move on to the next, while we have time to go into our Planning and Policy Committee slide to make sure everyone is aware of the comments that we receive, and then we'll comment on both of these items. So our last brief item today was to provide an update on the APCD Governing Board Planning and Policy Committee meeting on April 25th. The PNP heard a brief update from staff on the status of how the warehouse working group has been going about our work and provided staff with some feedback. The committee noted a correlation between truck activity and warehousing and how those activities were negatively impacting under-resourced communities in San Diego County. The committee believed that with the technology today, warehousing facilities should have the ability to monitor the trucks that deliver or pick up at their site. The concept of facilities reducing truck trips by adopting strategies to combine multiple deliveries was mentioned frequently. The committee also emphasized staff should ensure that in whatever option being explored, that truck activity was being tracked and reported. The committee also requested staff to investigate the secondary costs and co-benefits of actions pursued, including things like evaluating health costs of not pursuing any action, or the reduced costs of maintaining a road with fewer trucks when fewer trucks are driving on them. They also wanted us to ensure any strategies align well with MCAS and SERP targets and goals at the border and portside. And then finally, the committee also recommended that staff potentially explore investigating the limits of legal authority established thus far through South Coast Air Quality Management District Rule 2305, and prepare a risk analysis that outlines the risk and costs of specific pathways. Next slide, please. So I think we'll go ahead and at this point answer any comments both on the warehouse working group working definition that we've put together. Wanted to get feedback on that, as well as any comments or questions, feedback on the Planning and Policy Committee update. And just for some food for thought on the warehouse working group definition, you know, does the definition clarify what activities APCD is thinking about when it comes to indirect sources of emissions from warehouses through this effort? And what aspects would you want further clarified, specified, included, and what other exemptions, if any, would you want to have considered? So with that, I will go ahead and open up the feedback or open up the room to Lauren Cazares from San Diego Chamber.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to comment on the takeaways from the policy committee last week. I specifically just wanted to point out that it was, I think, kind of assumed that that warehouses were able to track these trips. And so I had kind of a question. Do we know if any of them are actively tracking the trips? And if not, I really think the only way that we are able to get a sense of, you know, what trucks are going where, or rather how many trucks are going where, not just on their travel paths, but rather the actual warehouses that they're ending up at, would be to ask the warehouses directly. So where are we at with a survey? I really think that it's going to be necessary in order to properly create an ISR if that's where we land.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Alejandra.
Yes, because you mentioned a couple of times that the committee asked about strategies to reduce truck traffic. And I just kind of, at least at the border, some of our larger warehouses are customs brokers, and they have no control over who sends merchandise and when, and they're all from different clients with different truck companies. So it's not like we may have companies like Sucarmex, where they are a sugar refiner or producer, and they do control their trucks. But the vast majority are cross-border brokers, I would say, on the warehouses. And maybe not the vast majority, but certainly a big portion of them, where I just kind of want to clarify where it would be very difficult for them. They basically don't control the truck strategy is what I want to point out. And I know we're coordinating some meetings with one of the warehouse owners that you requested, but I don't believe we have like a large custom broker. So I think you should definitely include them, because it's important that you understand how they operate.
Sure, Alejandro. Yeah, we can talk about that offline and see if there's a customs broker that we can coordinate as part of that visit down south. So that is something we can think about. Appreciate the comment. Let's see, Andrew Aguilar.
Yeah, Nick. Back to the activity-based model. Sand, and sorry, everybody hear me okay, or am I again?
I think it's okay for now. We'll see.
Okay. Then I'll try as that is for me. But one way that we can use to validate the data set in Caltrans truck and with the Sandag model, looking at with that certain locations where observation points is set track with like the traffic that we see in making sense. One way, one we can kind of store or kind of see was two data sets or compatible with each other, would just go to the same location geographically and see what the estimates are for both and see what they're like.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think we got the vast majority of that comment. You were cutting out a little bit here and there, so I would encourage you maybe to kind of throw kind of the main, just to make sure everybody got the flavor of your comment. I want to maybe throw that in the chat as well, because it was breaking up a little bit there. So
okay.
Apologize for that. Let's see. I want to catch up on chat comments. So Tim Garrett at Sandag says Sandag is in the process of oh, actually, I'm sorry. Michelle Giron says, I'd appreciate if Sandag conducted studies on warehousing and goods movement similar to SCAG's. Posted a link to a SCAG study. Tim Garrett from Sandag said, Sandag is in the process of updating its commercial vehicle model that will be based on a survey of businesses across the region conducted in 2022, and posted a link to the report and appendix for that survey. So encourage everyone to look at that. The updated model will be used for the 2025 regional plan. Andrew, I think posted the essence of what his comment was that was breaking up. So responding to Tim, one important question that arose when looking at the ABM transport choice projections was population. 2016 populations for both Sandag, ABM, and Caltrans economic forecasts match, but by 2025 and 2035, Sandag overestimated population by a significant margin. San Diego's population is trending downward and projected to decrease over the next few years. The last ABM projected steady growth. Craig Benedetto said we'll have to look into the definition and give you feedback. Please do not take a lack of input today to indicate support or opposition to the proposed definition. Understood, Craig, and we would appreciate any feedback you can provide on that working definition as well as others. Tim Garrett, just responding, I think, back to Andrew, point taken about the population and employment projections. We need to revisit them every several years and to have the most updated assumptions. And that's kind of part and parcel, I think, a good something to remember in all of this is that, you know, I think everybody involved is working with the best information that's available at the present time. As you heard from Paula, I think you've heard it from Kathy in the Planning and Policy Committee. You know, with any effort that we're doing, we're going to do the best we can with the data that we have available. And so that's going to be, you know, whatever strategy we move ahead with, you know, that's going to be part of further refining whatever we get. If there's opportunities to get better data, you know, in a timely fashion at the, you know, by potentially, you know, getting more accurate data, you know, we can certainly look into that, but also we also have to look at what we can do in a reasonable amount of time to do it in the interest of further protecting public health as well. So I see, let's see, I see Jack, well, actually I see Alejandra's hand and then Jack Monger.
No, sorry, I lowered it.
It was a legacy hand, sorry. I see Jack Monger and then, oh, that's it, okay.
Thanks, Nick. I wanted to go back to the comment that Lauren Casares was making, asking, I think, where the idea or suggestion of a survey was. Has there been any discussion at the district in terms of whether, I heard it mentioned earlier, maybe doing a survey as part of the rule or after a rule has been written, but the subject seems to keep coming back up, particularly at the governing board, at the working committee last week, about the need to collect that survey information. Is there any discussion about following up on that?
You know, I think we could probably provide a better update at their next meeting. You know, we can certainly talk about what we've been thinking maybe up to this point on that. We did, in the early working group meetings, we did explore a potential option to get some real kind of high level survey information, you know, on specific sites. That certainly still could be on the table. If we're looking at something at a larger scale, that's somewhat of still an open question, I think. So, you know, I think we could probably provide a better update at a future working group meeting on where we stand on that. At the same level, you know, I think APCD is also all ears in terms of if others have useful data sets, if there is, you know, the potential for other groups or agencies to come out and send us that data, provide that data in some way, or do the data collection, you know, I think we're all ears in terms of if there's something out there like that. we'd love to see it. So I'll just kind of leave it at that for now. But we can provide an update at a future meeting on kind of where we're thinking on that.
Okay, two other quick comments. Especially since Board Member Shu is here, I would just like to ask that perhaps you take the initiative at the next meeting to share with some of the other board members that the discussion about how we would go about collecting this information from warehouse operators was never expressed that, as if to say the warehouse operators have this information and don't want to share it about the trucks coming into their facilities. It was merely pointed out, as Alejandra did today, that it's just not as simple as that. It's a lot of time and a lot of work just to express that that's the fact of the situation. Nobody's saying they won't do it. Nobody's saying they refuse to do it. Yet I'm asking you to share that just because I thought there were some strong, sensitive comments made from several board members who seemed to believe that some of the members of this group, for example, were basically saying that they didn't want to have to provide that information or couldn't or wouldn't, and that was never anybody's intent at all. So just wanted to share that with you. And finally, I hope however this turns out, whether we focus on health benefits, I hope we'll focus on health benefits, because we do know that emission reductions overall are a health benefit. But there are certainly some communities that are experiencing more health impacts than others. And I think that's part of the benefit of what Andrew's study shares with us today, is exactly what you were saying, Chair Shu, which is not that we don't want an ISR, but there are other alternatives to a warehouse rule that's focused on the entire county, as opposed to a strategy that looks to really address the emissions that are hindering a specific part of the region more than others, or let's say way worse than others. And as was pointed out today, Escondido and El Cajon already share a huge burden. Wouldn't it perhaps make sense to focus energy and resources there to really begin to have some impact, as opposed to other areas where there's little or no relationship between the warehouse overall number of warehouses and the DPM or ozone impacts. So I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same place, and there were just some great expectations that merely passing an ISR would somehow solve all of these problems. But I think, as with everything else, now that we dig into it, we realize that that's not the case at all. But we would like to address these emissions, and we would like to do it in a way that provides some measurable, significant benefits to those communities. So I hope that's where we will eventually get here. And I know many of the members of the group that are here today feel the same way, and have already come up with some great suggestions to do just that.
Great. Thanks for the comment, Jack. I want to follow up with just the last two comments in the chat with the remaining time we have here. So Andrew notes, one way that we can validate the data sets between the Sandag behavior model and the Caltrans traffic data is to pick a geographic point like the 805-905 merger and see how the traffic counts in the model and as observed compare. So that's a good point, Andrew. I think that would be a good thing to study and look at, to see where those two comparisons and how the model lines up with the actual traffic counts. I think Tim Garrett responded to that as well. We do calibrate the models according to observed data, including truck and all vehicle counts from Caltrans. There's probably some variation between when counts are collected and made available versus when the model is developed. Okay, so we had a lot of good discussion today. Thank you all for coming prepared, and there was a lot of analysis today. There was a lot of data. Appreciate everybody hanging in there and providing great feedback to us. This is really important and helpful for APCD as we continue down this road. We're not going to have time, obviously, to get into any non-agenda items, but I'll give one last opportunity if there's anybody who has any last-minute feedback or comments to provide. before we wrap up the meeting? Oh, Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to again thank everybody for coming today, and to Jack's point and to Chair Shu's points earlier, we are here really about reducing impacts to public health. And I'm not sure that, you know, as APCD staff, we would come to the same conclusions necessarily that have been expressed in analysis of the IEA study. I think we still have some data collection that we need to do, and analysis that we need to do, and obviously to drill down on what those impacts look like at a community level. And we're trying to do that. And like we've said, we're going to come back with the best data that we can to support whatever proposals that we eventually bring forward. So I do want to thank Andrew also, if you're still on, for a lot of the work that you've done. Really appreciated that. And we're going to be, like Nick said, continuing to calibrate that data and pull from as many different data sources as we can continue to get as we move forward in this effort.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
So the last note I'll add is that our next meeting will be held on June 3rd, same time, 3 to 5 p.m. Again, encourage everyone to attend and sign up for that and register. Meeting agenda topics will be determined, although we're hoping to provide either in the June or July meeting kind of the numbers and some of the more analysis of kind of what we set up on the district analysis today. So that was kind of the overarching kind of direction of what we were heading at this point. We're hoping to come back in a meeting or two to provide some of the numbers and the metrics behind it. So that could be on the horizon. Again, we want to, as a reminder, notifications are sent to those subscribed in the Warehouse Working Group email listserv. So please sign up to receive those updates, and you'll get the agendas and presentations the Friday before the meeting. So hopefully everybody's on that. And then I think on the next slide is our staff contact information for me and Randy. As always, contact us with any questions, concerns, comments. We're happy to take any of them. At this point, I think that will conclude our presentation. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and hope everyone has a good remaining evening.
Good time management, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.